Hello there, in this video we're taking an in-depth look at the Arizona Senate race. Kyrsten Sinema is now an independent, which makes this race very tricky to predict. Let's start by taking a look at the senators who have switched parties in the middle of their terms to try and establish some sort of historical precedent, and we actually do have three. In 2009, incumbent Republican Senator Arlen Specter became a Democrat as he believed the Republican Party was becoming too conservative. He ended up losing the Democratic primary to Joe Sestak, who ultimately lost to Pat Toomey by 2%. In 2006, Joe Lieberman switched from Democrat to Independent Democrat. He lost the Democratic primary to Ned Lamont, but ultimately won as a third-party candidate on the Connecticut for Lieberman line. He received less than 50% of the vote, but beat Lamont by 10%. In 2000, Lieberman received more than 63% of the vote, so that was quite a big drop. Lieberman ultimately retired in 2012. Lieberman shows that it is possible for an incumbent senator to win while running as an independent, but Lieberman had some edges that Sinema simply doesn't. Lieberman had by far the most money, but Democratic Party frontrunner Ruben Gallego already outraised Kyrsten Sinema in Q1, more on that in just a minute. And Lieberman was leading in all the polls, Sinema isn't. One other senator, Jim Jeffords, switched parties, but he never ran for re-election on his new party line. His seat was ultimately won by Bernie Sanders. Let's talk a little more about Ruben Gallego. He represents Arizona's 3rd Congressional District. He's a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and as of April 2023 has voted in line with Joe Biden 100% of the time. I think this helps him appeal to both moderate Democrats and progressives. In Q1, Gallego raised $3.7 million to Sinema's $2.3 million. And Sinema's approval ratings have changed drastically since becoming an independent. She went from net +1 approval among Democrats to net -29. She went from net -21 among independents to net -1. And she went from net -15 to net -5 among Republicans. Overall, she stayed at net -12 among all voters. We're going to take a look at the exit polls from 2018 to get a gauge on how Sinema won in 2018, but first I just want to touch on the myth of independence real quick. According to 538, about 75% of independents lean towards the Democrat or Republican Party, and these voters aren't very different than the voters who registered with a specific political party. So don't think that just because Kyrsten Sinema is now an independent that she'll suddenly get the vast majority of independent votes. But let's take a look at 2018 and keep in mind that it was a very favorable year for Democrats. Sinema won 97% of Democrats, 12% of Republicans, and 50% of independents. She won 94% of people who said they were liberal, 63% who said they were moderate, and 14% who said they were conservative. Let's take a look at how voter registration breaks down in Arizona and see if we can't make some rough guesses at how the votes will be divvied up. 34% are Republicans, 34% are independents, and 30% are Democrats, leaving about 2% for third parties, whose voters probably won't vote for Sinema or one of the major party candidates. It's such a hyper-partisan environment. I really expect Democratic voters and Republican voters to consolidate around their candidates, so even if we give Sinema 1/6 of the Democrats and Republicans, and then give her half of all independents, she's still only looking at about 28% of the total vote, and I just don't see that being enough in a three-way race. She'll either need to win the vast majority of independents, which seems unlikely to me, or she'll need to pull in tons of votes from either the Democratic Party or the GOP. Considering the Democrats already have a strong candidate and that Sinema's approvals have tanked among Democrats, I think she'll need to pull some more votes from the GOP. So, who will the GOP nominee be? The only serious candidate to officially declare their candidacy is Pinal County Sheriff and election conspiracy theorist Mark Lamb. Lamb does actually have a long list of priorities on his campaign website. Whether you agree with him or not, I'm glad that he's making it very easy to see his platform, even if he does couch that platform under the heading, Sheriff Lamb's Targets. Subtle. It's a pretty standard MAGA Republican platform, which at the very least will make him competitive in the primary. We saw these types of candidates do very well in the 2022 GOP primaries. And a lot of other familiar names are considering a run. Kari Lake, who still hasn't conceded the 2022 governor's race, may run. She raised millions as she was challenging the results of the election and didn't spend much of it. Is she going to use it to jumpstart a Senate campaign? Maybe. Karrin Taylor Robson, who lost the GOP primary for governor to Lake, may run. And Blake Masters, who lost the 2022 Senate race against Mark Kelly, may run. Just a reminder, one Republican operative said that Masters scored the worst focus group results of any candidate he had ever seen. And one more name, Andy Biggs, who currently represents Arizona's 5th Congressional District, might run. We actually do have some polling data out of Arizona, and it's encouraging for Gallego, but take it with a grain of salt. The most recent polls were conducted by Public Policy Polling, sometimes known as PPP, and the polls were sponsored by Gallego's campaign. Generally, a candidate's internal polling favors them by a large degree. And surprise, surprise, Gallego is leading in a 3-way race versus Sinema and Mark Lamb, Sinema and Kari Lake, and Sinema and Jim Lamone, who ran for Senate in 2022. This is in line with polling conducted earlier this year by OH Predictive Insights. In a 3-way race against Sinema and 4 different GOP candidates, Kari Lake, Karrin Taylor Robson, Blake Masters, and Doug Ducey, who already said he isn't going to run, Gallego led in every scenario. And despite all of this, I actually do think the eventual GOP candidate has to be the favorite right now. If party voters consolidate around their candidates, I don't currently see a path for Sinema unless she wins a vast majority of independents. And in Arizona, Republican voters do slightly outnumber Democratic Party voters. How does this rating impact the balance of power in the Senate? Check out my next video where I break down every single Senate race in 2024.